year is 1944. The location is a shattered village in the French countryside. The air is thick with the smell of cordite and wet dust. An American GI crouched behind a crumbling stone wall is breathing hard. In his hands, he holds the M1 Garand, a weapon General George S. Patton famously called the greatest battle implement ever devised. It is a marvel of engineering. While the German enemy across the street is working the bolt of his carabiner 98K after every single shot, click-clack, bang, click-clack, the American can fire 8 rounds of .3006 ammunition as fast as he can pull the trigger. He possesses the ultimate advantage in infantry warfare, volume of fire. But there is a ghost in the machine, a quirk of design that has become the stuff of nightmares for the soldier and a favorite plot point for Hollywood screenwriters. The GI sees movement in a window. He raises the rifle. He fires. Bang, bang, bang. He counts the shots in his head, or he tries to, amidst the chaos. 6, 7, 8. The bolt flies back and locks open. The empty en-bloc clip, made of high-carbon spring steel, is ejected upward. It strikes the receiver and flips into the air, spinning end over end. And as it hits the ground, it makes a sound. Ping! It is a sharp, distinct, high-pitched metallic ring. It cuts through the low thrum of battle like a knife. In the folklore of World War II, this sound was known as the dinner bell. The legend goes like this. That innocent ping was a death sentence. It was an auditory beacon that announced to every enemy soldier within hearing distance, "I am empty. I am unarmed. Come and kill me." Stories circulated in the barracks and foxholes from Sicily to Okinawa. Veterans whispered warnings to the fresh replacements. Watch your ammo count. Don't let them hear the ping. The fear was that a crafty German grenadier or a fanatical Japanese soldier would wait in silence, counting the shots. They would wait for that metallic ring, knowing it bought them a window of 3 or 4 seconds, the time it took a nervous, fumbling American to shove a fresh clip into the magazine. The myth grew so powerful that it spawned tales of counter-tactics. There are stories of American soldiers carrying empty clips in their pockets. According to the legend, a GI would fire a few rounds, pause, and then throw the empty clip against a rock or his helmet to simulate the sound. Ping. Then he would wait. When the foolish enemy broke cover to charge the empty American, the GI would raise his still-loaded rifle and cut him down. It was called baiting the ping. It's a compelling story. It paints a picture of a fatal flaw in a perfect weapon, a technological Achilles heel that turned the hunter into the hunted. It adds a layer of psychological chess to the brutality of combat. But how much of this is real? To understand the dinner bell, we have to understand the psychology of the soldier. The battlefield is a place of sensory overload, explosions, screaming, the snap of supersonic bullets, the roar of engines. Yet the soldier is hyper-aware of his own vulnerability. The moment a weapon runs dry is the moment of maximum helplessness. That silence, broken only by the ejection of the clip, represents the terrifying pause between life and death. The ping became the focal point for this anxiety. It became a symbol of the American soldier's reliance on his machine. If the machine signaled its emptiness, surely the enemy, the professional, ruthless enemy, would capitalize on it. But history is often different from the movies. Did the German Wehrmacht actually train their troops to listen for a musical note in the middle of a firefight? Could a sound that registers at roughly 100 decibels truly be heard over the 160 decibel roar of gunfire and mortar shells?
Or is the dinner bell a case of survivor bias, a story told by men who feared the worst, even if the worst never actually happened? As we peel back the layers of this legend, we find ourselves standing at the intersection of acoustic physics and the fog of war. The M1 Garand was the weapon that liberated the world, but for 80 years it has been haunted by a single, ringing ghost. It is time to find out if that ghost ever really killed anyone.
To understand the sound, you must first understand the steel. In the quiet workshops of the Springfield Armory in the 1930s, a Canadian-born genius named John Garand was wrestling with a problem that had plagued firearms designers for 50 years. He needed to build a rifle that could fire semi-automatically, but he needed to do it without the heavy, fragile, and easily lost detachable magazines that were common on submachine guns of the era. His solution was a stroke of industrial elegance, the en-bloc clip. Unlike the German Mauser or the British Enfield, where soldiers had to strip rounds off a clip and push them into the internal magazine, the Garand system was designed for brute force and speed. The clip itself was a simple, stamped piece of 1060 high-carbon steel, parkerized to prevent rust. It held 8 rounds of .306 ammunition in a staggered column. It wasn't just a container, it was an integral part of the gun's internal mechanism. When a GI was in the mud of Bastogne or the black sands of Iwo Jima, he didn't have to fiddle with loose rounds. He grabbed a loaded clip, shoved the entire unit, steel and brass together, down into the open receiver until it clicked. The bolt would slam forward, sometimes biting the thumb of the careless, known as Garand thumb, and the weapon was live. But the ping was born from the violence of the 8th shot. Here is the anatomy of that split-second event. As the gas from the final bullet travels down the barrel, it expands into the gas cylinder, driving the operating rod backward. The heavy steel bolt rotates and flies to the rear, extracting the final spent brass casing and ejecting it to the right. Inside the rifle, a spring-loaded follower arm has been pushing the cartridges up, feeding the hunger of the chamber. Now, with the 8th round gone, the follower pushes up against nothing but the steel clip itself. This upward pressure triggers the clip latch to disengage. This is the critical moment. Deep inside the receiver, a powerful ejector spring is compressed, waiting for this release. The moment the latch lets go, that spring releases its stored energy. It kicks the empty steel clip upwards with significant force. The clip strikes the rear heel of the receiver as it exits. This is where physics takes over. The clip is made of hardened spring steel. It is heat-treated to be incredibly durable so that the feedlets don't bend under pressure. Because the steel is so hard, it possesses a high natural frequency. When it strikes the hard steel of the receiver, it doesn't thud, it rings. It is effectively a tuning fork struck against a granite table. The resulting sound, a sharp, resonant, metallic ping, vibrates at a frequency of roughly 1400 to 1600 hertz. It spins into the air, tumbling end over end, still ringing as it falls to the ground. Critics and armchair generals would later call this a design flaw. They argued that the ejection system was too energetic, too loud, too distinct. But John Garand looked at it differently. In the chaos of combat, where a soldier's senses are dulled by concussion and adrenaline, visual checks are unreliable. You cannot count shots when mortar shells are landing nearby. The en-bloc system provided a tactile and auditory confirmation that was absolute. When the bolt locked back and the clip flew out, the rifle was telling its master, "I am empty. Feed me." Compare this to the German soldier across the field. When his K98K ran dry, he heard a click. A click is the sound of failure. It is the sound of a firing pin hitting an empty chamber on a live trigger pull. It means you tried to kill and failed. The American soldier never heard a click. He heard the ping. The ping wasn't a request for permission to reload. It was part of the cycle. While the clip was still ringing in the air, the American's hand was already moving to his belt for the next 8 rounds. The anatomy of the ping was not the anatomy of a mistake. It was the acoustic signature of the fastest reloading battle rifle the world had ever seen. The steel clip didn't just hold bullets, it held the rhythm of American victory.
To understand why the M1 ping myth collapses under scrutiny, we must first step away from the quiet of the shooting range and step into the acoustic insanity of 1944. The battlefield does not have a volume knob. It is a wall of sound so dense, so violent, and so overwhelming that it defies the comprehension of anyone who hasn't lived through it. Let us reconstruct a typical engagement in the Hurtgen Forest, November 1944. Private First-Class Miller is pinned down behind a rotting log. The air around him is not empty, it is a pressurized storm. To his left, a Browning automatic rifle, Bar, is chugging away. To his right, 60mm mortars are impacting the earth. Let's look at the physics of this moment. The muzzle blast of Miller's own M1 Garand firing a .30-06 round registers at approximately 165 decibels. To put that in perspective, a jet engine taking off is about 140 decibels. Pain begins at 130. Instant, permanent hearing damage occurs at 140. Miller is pulling the trigger 8 times in rapid succession, creating a localized earthquake of pressure waves right next to his own head. Across the clearing, 50 yards away, is the German enemy. He is manning an MG-42 machine gun. This weapon fires 1,200 rounds per minute. It doesn't sound like a gun, it sounds like ripping canvas. The sonic cracks of the bullets passing Miller's head, the miniature sonic booms created as the projectiles break the sound barrier, are snapping at 140 decibels. In this environment, sound does not travel cleanly, it is shredded. Now consider the ping. The sound of an en-bloc clip striking the receiver is roughly 100 decibels at the source. It is a high-frequency ring. But physics dictates the inverse square law. As sound travels, its intensity diminishes rapidly. By the time that 100 decibel ping travels 50 yards across a muddy, tree-filled forest, its energy has dissipated to a faint whisper, barely audible above a conversational whisper. Now try to hear that whisper while standing next to a jackhammer. That is the reality of the German soldier. For the enemy to hear the ping, he would need to filter out the mortar explosions, 175 decibels, the machine gun fire, 155 decibels, the screaming of wounded men, and the blood pounding in his own ears. This brings us to the second factor, the fog of war and human physiology. Under the extreme stress of life or death combat, the human body enters a state of auditory exclusion. The brain, flooded with adrenaline and cortisol, begins to shut down non-essential sensory input to focus on survival. Peripheral vision vanishes, tunnel vision, and peripheral hearing disappears. Soldiers in combat often report that their weapons sounded like pop guns or that the battle went silent. A German soldier in a firefight is not a calm observer conducting a science experiment. He is terrified. His ears are ringing with tinnitus from the constant concussion of explosives. He is not listening for a delicate metallic musical note. He is listening for the absence of incoming fire. The myth suggests that the ping was a dinner bell inviting the enemy to charge. But tactically, this is absurd. Even if, by some miracle of acoustics, the German soldier heard the clip eject, what did it tell him? It told him that one American was reloading. It did not tell him about the other 10 men in the squad who still had full clips. It did not tell him about the bar gunner waiting for a target. And most importantly, it told him that the American would be reloaded in less than 4 seconds. To charge a position based on a faint half-second sound was not a tactical advantage, it was suicide. The ping was audible to the shooter, certainly. It was likely audible to the man standing next to him. But the idea that it was a clear tactical signal heard across a roaring battlefield is a triumph of Hollywood storytelling over the brutal laws of physics. In the cacophony of combat, the dinner bell was drowned out by the drums of war.
If the legend of the dinner bell were true, the archives of the German Wehrmacht would be full of it. The German military machine was famous for its obsessive attention to detail. They wrote manuals for everything.
They analyzed the turning radius of tanks, the calorie intake of infantrymen, and the ballistic properties of enemy armor. If the standard issue rifle of their primary adversary had a fatal, exploitable flaw, a sound that signaled "attack now," it would have been documented. It would have been taught in boot camps from Berlin to Bavaria. Historians and weapons experts have spent decades scouring captured German documents, training manuals, and after-action reports looking for a single reference to the M1 Garand's ping as a tactical indicator. The result? Absolute silence. There is not a single known German training manual that instructs soldiers to listen for the sound of an ejecting clip. There is no Japanese doctrine that suggests timing a banzai charge to the metallic ring of an American rifle. To the enemy commanders, the sound was irrelevant. Why? Because in the brutal mathematics of World War II combat, the ping was a lie. Consider the perspective of a German squad leader. He's facing an American squad. He knows the Americans operate in 12-man units. Even if he hears a ping from one position, a miraculous feat of hearing amidst the deafening roar of MG-42s and mortars, what does that information actually tell him? It tells him that one rifle is empty. It tells him nothing about the other 11 men. It tells him nothing about the Browning automatic rifle gunner, who is the anchor of the American squad and is definitely not empty. To order his men to charge into the teeth of an American squad because one rifleman is reloading would be an act of criminal negligence. It would be sending men to die for a 2-second window of opportunity. And that is the second point that debunks the myth: the speed of the American reload. The legend relies on the idea that the ping left the GI helpless for a long time. In reality, a trained American infantryman could reload the M1 Garand in less than 4 seconds. Many could do it in 2. The en-bloc clip system was designed for exactly this speed. By the time a German soldier registered the sound, made the decision to move, and lifted his head, the American had already shoved a fresh 8-round clip into the receiver, and the bolt had slammed home. The German would be charging into a loaded muzzle. This brings us to the famous sub-myth, baiting the ping. The story goes that cunning GIs would carry empty clips, fire a few rounds, and then throw the empty clip against a rock to simulate the sound, tricking the enemy into exposing themselves. While this makes for a clever movie scene, veterans and historians largely dismiss it as barracks folklore. Think about the mechanics of it. To do this, a soldier would have to stop firing, take his hand off the trigger, find a loose empty clip, which he likely didn't save, throw it with enough force to ring, and then instantly get his weapon back up. And he would have to do this while his rifle was actually still half full? Why would a soldier waste precious seconds playing games with a piece of scrap metal when he could simply shoot the enemy? The American doctrine was fire and maneuver, not trick and wait. Major General Julian Hatcher, a legendary U.S. Army ordnance expert, investigated these claims after the war. He found virtually no verified accounts of soldiers dying because of the ping, nor verified accounts of the baiting tactic actually working. The tactical disadvantage was a myth born of anxiety. The enemy did not fear the sound of the clip ejecting. They feared the sound that came before it, the rapid, rhythmic, semi-automatic thunder of 8 rounds of .30-06 tearing through their lines. The Germans didn't call the Garand the dinner bell. They called it the semi-automatic terror. They didn't care when it went ping. They cared that it never seemed to stop going bang.
The war ended in 1945, But the stories did not. On the troop transports steaming back to New York and San Francisco, in the VFW halls, and later in the living rooms of suburban America, the veterans of the greatest generation gathered to make sense of what they had survived. And in these retellings, the legend of the M1 ping grew from a battlefield anecdote into an unquestioned historical fact. To understand why this myth persists despite the lack of evidence, we must look not at ballistics, but at psychology. We must understand soldier folklore. War is an environment of chaotic, uncontrollable variables. A soldier can do everything right and still die. To cope with this terrifying lack of control, soldiers create rules, superstitions, and legends. They look for patterns in the chaos. The ping became a focal point for the universal soldier's fear, the fear of running dry. In basic training, drill sergeants, the high priests of soldier folklore, needed a way to terrorize recruits into mastering the reload. It wasn't enough to say, "Reload quickly." They had to add a consequence. "If you fumble with this clip," they would scream, "the Jap will hear that ping and he will be on you before you can blink." It was a noble lie. It was a teaching tool designed to instill muscle memory. But for the 19-year-old kid shipping out to Okinawa, it became a gospel truth. He arrived on the battlefield already terrified of the sound. Every time his rifle went ping, his heart skipped a beat, not because the enemy was charging, but because he had been conditioned to believe the enemy should be charging. This is where survivor bias twists the narrative. The men who came home were the ones who survived the reload. They remembered the adrenaline spike they felt when the clip ejected. They remembered the panic of fumbling for a fresh clip with shaking hands. Over time, that internal fear transformed into an external threat. The story shifted from "I was scared when my gun went empty" to "the enemy was waiting for my gun to go empty." The myth also served as a psychological scapegoat. It is hard to accept that a friend died simply because of bad luck or a random mortar shell. It is easier to process grief if there is a specific, mechanical reason, a fatal flaw. Blaming the ping for a casualty gave the death a cause, a reason, something that could be identified and blamed. Then Hollywood took over. If the myth was born in the barracks, it was immortalized by the movies. Sound designers for war films loved the M1 Garand. The ping was a distinct, dramatic audio cue that cut through the muddy mix of explosions. It signaled a dramatic beat. The hero is vulnerable. The audience holds its breath. From The Longest Day to Saving Ryan, and later in video games like Call of Duty and Medal of Honor, the ping was elevated from a mechanical quirk to the central star of the show. For millions of people who never held a rifle, the ping became the defining sound of World War II. It became a Pavlovian trigger. Gamers today reload their virtual weapons just to hear it. But the reality remains silent. The veterans who actually fought the Germans and the Japanese knew the truth in their bones, even if the folklore said otherwise. They knew that the M1 Garand was the envy of every army on Earth. They knew that for every one time the clip went ping, the rifle had just gone bang 8 times, usually resulting in a dead enemy. The persistence of the myth isn't a testament to the rifle's failure, it is a testament to the soldier's humanity. It represents the anxiety of the empty chamber, the fear of the pause. The M1 ping is not a deadly flaw. It is the acoustic signature of the weapon that saved the world, a sound that rings out through history not as a dinner bell for the enemy, but as the Liberty Bell of the infantry. The myth survives because it is a good story, but the rifle survives because it was the best.